Hello, this is me again. We're going to do up another Atavism tutorial. This one will be a quality of life improvement setup. Sorry it's been a while since I did the last stream slash video on YouTube, but I've been spending all my time converting all the recipes over, and I kind of figured nobody would want to watch me do that. So in this case, for example, we've already shown doing the races, putting them into the setups here, and I can hop into our little scene here. We've got all of our races. Got male, females on the cat, elves, humans, and we've set up the underwear to work on them across the board. We've got all of our models, and that's pretty much standard. And then we get into the fun stuff that I've been working on, which is this. These are the current recipes, and you can see all the ones that I've so far gone in and converted. I've renamed them into different systems, and in a sense it just makes things easier, and I still got all of these to do, so it'll still be a while. But I figure I'm just going to show you easier ways to implement some of the changes that you'll need to do once you get this far. So in this case, for example, we can look at my gloves. My females, their gloves match the males. There's 28 of them. If I come under my dresses, my female gloves, scroll through, there's a total of 27 in here. And if I go into my males, even though they're not all the way converted over just yet, as soon as I find him, because I haven't even started on him yet. They're in here somewhere. So many. So many. And gloves. No, these are the ones I didn't convert into that one. Well, anyway, somewhere in here I have my male outfits too. I just haven't moved them around. I've got so many things still to do, it's ridiculous. But basically all of this stuff is on the female side, mostly fully converted over and ready to kind of come into the system. Now the problem that we have up there, the males, so on their gloves, for example, they are not renamed, but there's the exact same number of them. So my males can come in here and use their gloves, and then the same numbers would represent the same ones for the females. So the females would have the same numbering code. I've just got to go through and actually change all the numbers. But then they'll all match up into each other. Now the next problem you'll run into is these are fine and all, but you have to have a way to represent them inside of the client side. So the clients are going to, in a sense, open it up, and they're going to see, for example, you get an item in your inventory. Well, what are they? And you need to come up with these little icons, something to represent them. And for me, I figure the easiest way is to not do it yourself and use what's already there. Want to code what you don't need to code and somebody else has already done. So we have, oops, wrong one. We need back into here. Into photo booth. This is comes with UMA, but inside a photo booth you get this weird little thing here, and the beauty of this is that you can go through and set all your stuff. So in this case you pick your race. In this case it's the male human, and you can see all these different viewpoints. When you start this up, it will actually make the icons for you for all of the equipable items. So if I come into my system, it's under test icons. For example, I've gone ahead and created a bunch of these little things. Oh, these aren't it, because yeah, those go away. But I put them up on my desktop, get them out of the way because I've been messing around in here. This is, for example, what it will create with my little naming scheme. And this has gone through, for example, the feet, every pair of shoes, boots, and everything else that I've renamed. It's taken a picture of them, and now I know this picture goes with that file name. So it's very useful for turning around and making sure that my stuff matches, and then I can use these as the Atavism icons later on. But the hard part that you'll have to deal with on the Atavism side is the equipment displays. The equipment displays are a royal pain in the Rumpelstiltskin because it takes 2 of them for each item. So if I come under my resources, content, equipment displays, UMA, fashion. For the plate gear, you got this one and this one that you basically need to set up before you're able to actually equip the gear inside of Atavism. It's not hard. You literally could just drag this into the scene, duplicate it, copy, paste it, change your variables, put them back in. But if you're looking at those files, there's 203 in this system, just for the females. And some of these I haven't converted over yet, and some of them are not even in this system. I haven't done the wings or the horns, and I still got to do more stuff to add the stuff into those. So this is 203 things. Each one needs 2 prefabs created to basically go through and let you use them inside of Atavism. That's a lot just for one character. And then when you figure you got to do that for the males and the female variants, and if you're using, for example, multiple races and each one has their own versions of the stuff, it can definitely get tedious to do. So the other day I was thinking about that, and I went ahead and started scripting up some stuff, and we're going to go ahead and automate converting this stuff over, creating in our little system and whatnot, and kind of just doing our stuff that way. So give me a minute to get some stuff opened up here. And basically we're going to write up a little script inside of Unity that is going to take our naming scheme and convert it over to basically creating all these prefabs for us. So we'll create the model prefab and the display equipment prefab, and then all we have to do later on is add it into the database itself, which I'll be doing in another tutorial because that's going to be part of the CMS system. So lots of fun stuff there. But basically what we are going to be dealing with is pretty easy stuff. So this one here, this is the character clothing, and if we pull the source code for it, this is literally what Atavism gives to set this thing up. You can see it's an extremely short and sweet code. There's not a lot of stuff in here, but there's stuff we need to change, primarily these. We need to tell it what slot. For example, are these hands, chest, legs, helmets, hair, whatever, that's the slot in UMA. And then the recipe list, we need to tell it for which DNA, which genders, all get which basically wardrobe recipe that goes with them. So if we look it up in here, that's all these things here. So we're going to create a template for these 2 systems, and I've already got one, but I'm going to delete those just so we can show creating them here. So in this case, I'm just going to come in, going to take my plate armor, drag it into a scene. In fact, I'm going to get out of here before I mess up a different scene. So let me get into my empty poking around scene. So in here, we're going to basically just drag in 2 of these. So we need the model and we need the plate. Now for the plate, I have 6 race recipes. I have male and female variants for elf, human, and the cat. So there's a total of 6 options. So I'm going to set my 6. I'm just going to blank these out because they don't matter. We're going to fill those in with the script. You'll also want to do this inside the script primarily because you'll have your own naming schemes and everything else. Take out the target slot, and then we're just going to give this a name. and save that. And then we're going to unpack it. Make sure it's not part of anything. Do the same for this one before we change anything. And this one here will be the equipment display template. And I'm just going to set this to none just because we're going to set it later. So this one, all we need to do is reference the model file, which is this file here. So when you go to use an item, it's going to fire up this script, this little equipment display. It's going to say, well, what am I supposed to do? What's the model data? And then what am I supposed to do with it? In this case, we're attaching an object, it's armor. And then it's going to come over here and ask it, hey, what slot does it go on? And which UMA recipe am I supposed to load for it based on your race? So that's what we need, and we need those set up to be our little templates. Now, if I close some of these things out so it's less crowded, I'm going to come under my other packages. Comes with Atavism for some of the icons and stuff. I'm just going to dump them in there for the time being so we can use them. And you can see here I made a little prefabs folder. I'm going to come in here and create 2 new folders. One for the displays and one for the models, just so it's less cluttered. And then in here's where I've already made the script. Everything works out of it, but we're going to make up a new one. So we're going to create a new script. We're going to open that there up in Visual Studio. Now, we only need one function in here, and that's going to be the start. I could set this up to run inside the menu system up here, but once you've got your stuff set up, you're pretty much going to run this, and then you never need to run this again, so there's no point in doing anything fancy with it. So, yeah, it doesn't do us a lot of good with any of that. Now, what we need to do is make sure that our stuff has a simple naming scheme. So, under my gloves, for example, the naming scheme is very simple. We have the gender, an underscore, the type, an underscore, the number. And in this case, we know we have numbers 1 through 28 through 27. So it gives us a total of 27 options. We need to make up a script that's going to run through 27 of these and create the prefabs and all the stuff for us so we don't have to mess with the things. So it's not hard. We only need a few systems for it. We're going to get rid of the update functions. And up here we're going to get rid of the systems and collections and all that because we don't need it. We can use the editor, which we sort of do because we're going to be using a prefab utility, and then we're going to need to reference the Atavism system itself. So we're using the Unity editor, and we're also using Atavism. For this, we need we need 2 public game objects. One is going to be for our model data prefab. And then this one will be for the display prefab. Now we're just going to save this. Hop back into Unity here. Our stuff should be there ready to go. I'm only going to do this for the gloves just because it's rinse and repeat for everything. So show you once and you can write the code. Just keep in mind this doesn't have any error checks or anything else in it. Now if we look at this, there's not a whole lot of nothing here, but these are the only things we care about. We have to be able to define these things to make sure our stuff works. So we're going to come up here, we're just going to delete everything out the scene. You'll just make an empty scene for this. Create an empty game object, doesn't matter what you call it, and we're just going to attach our new script to it. and it's not going to ask for the model prefab template and the display prefab template, which are the files we just made over here. So this one here is our model data, and this one here is our display data. And again, these don't contain anything fancy in them. They're all blank settings. Nothing's in them. The reason we're defining the spaces in them is sometimes Unity doesn't like to let us edit a list that does not already exist. So sometimes, for example, running the add command will complain you can't add to something that doesn't exist. You're referencing in all objects, and so we just set them up ahead of time, and then we're going to actually define everything in them. So that part's done. Those things are linked in there. Now we have direct access to those templates. So the next part then is that we need to actually create a loop that's going to actually, well, do the work. So we're just going to come into our start. Now in here we need 2 more game objects, but these are going to be temp, and they're going to be basically just deleted, reused, reinstantiated, deleted, and so on and so forth. But we need 2 of them, 1 for each of the game objects that we just referenced. So we're just going to make 2 new game objects, and we'll just call this model temp. And that's it. Now we don't need to assign these inside the editor. So if we save our code and we come into here, they won't show up over here because since we didn't tell them to make them publicly available, they're default to private. So they're only going to be able to be used inside of the script itself, which is fine because that's what we want it to do. And get out of all this. Why do I still have you open? Get rid of you. We hop into here. Now the next step is to create the loop itself. So we're going to make a log saying what we're doing. And now we're going to do up our for loop. We're going to do an initialization of x to 0 while x is less than the size of our glove count, which is at 27. Each loop we add 1 to it, and we create the loop function. Now since mine are numbered not from 0, so in here my first one starts out gloves number 1, not female gloves 0. In variables in the computer, they're going to start at 0, so we have to add 1 to it to start off at 1. So we're just going to make a initial integer for, we'll just call it T1. This is equal to our current count plus 1. So our first count, we're going to start at 0, and then in here is going to make that first loop into a number 1. And now we need to set up some names. So our first, we're going to do up a string for the model name itself. Since we're doing gloves, we're just going to do gloves underscore. We're going to add in our number. And since this is the model, we will also add another underscore model at the end. This way we can tell the difference between our prefabs, which ones are the model data and which ones are the actual equipment displays. The models will always end with the model. Let me slap on that. And for the display, it'll basically be the same thing but without the end. In turn, it's just going to be gloves and then the number. So there's that part. Now we need to create the saving location, which will be more strings. And didn't I say that as a model or models? Let's come under here, models. And you. And then this gets added into the model name. And then we add a prefab to the end of it. And there's it. Then we're going to do the same thing for the display. And that was under displays. And then this is also with a prefab. So that sets the name that we're going to give the file, as well, or basically the object's name itself. And then this is telling it where we're going to save the file to. We're going to separate the model data versus the display data into their own folders so it's easier to navigate them. And now we need to actually throw these things into the system. So before we can create copies of objects, we have to instantiate them into the scene. So we're going to take our model temp and we're going to go ahead and spawn it. And pretty much the exact same thing here, but get rid of this, and this goes into the model. One is the model prefab, and then we need to do the same thing for the display. So the display temp also gets instantiated in. And that time I did it right. Now we need to go through here and start setting up our stuff. So to start with, nothing really needs change for the most part in the displays other than its name. So we'll go ahead and get that one out of the way. Stop auto-correcting and doing it wrong. Dot name equals the name. That's what we want. And that's the only thing we're going to set on the display for the time being. The last thing we have to set on the display version, if we look inside of here, we hop in there, that's this file. This is basically giving it a name up here. Well, technically this part here, which we can't see, but the equipment display template is setting that name to, in our case, the gloves and then the number. And then we're going to go ahead and, I don't know why we still have this, take those to zeros. They're definitely not needed. And then it's going to come here and set up the model. Now we can't set the model yet because we haven't made the model. That's the next part of our little code. So now we need to go through and set up our model name to do the same thing. Model temp dot name equals the model name. And basically, so we've instantiated them both into the scene with these, and we've given their names here. Now we need to go through and set the variables on the model. So for that, it's basically a giant loop, and you'll need to change this for your naming scheme and for your file system. But if you go through and do model temp, we're going to get the component, and this is the script that we're referencing on this one, which is the character clothing. And since we're using Atavism at the top, It can already see its file system and let us use it. So all we have to do is type it in there and it will start filling it in for us. We want to reference the target slot, and this will be set to whatever your slot is that you are referencing. So in this case we're doing the gloves, so these go on the hand slot. And now we need to do the same thing, but this time we are doing the race information. So this gets added into the recipe list, and we've already defined them here. So these elements already exist, they just have no information. We have 6 of them, and again, computers start at the number 0. We have 2 variables to set for each one. So we have 6 entries, 2 entries per, and so we need a total of 12 of these. So this is an array, so we're just going to start off with a empty bracket because we're just going to start copying. We're going to need to define the name, which is the race. And then we need to do the same thing for the recipe. And we're going to define these as we copy everything in here. So for these, I need to make a copy 6 times. And then for each one of these, we're just going to make 2 for each reference. So we have a 0, and why are you overwriting? We have 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, oops, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. So that gives us our 6 references. Now you'll need to set these for whatever yours are. In my case, this goes into Atavism's name. So if I look in here, for example, these are what I have to put in there. Cat female, cat male, elf female, yada yada yada. It's asking you to put in the name of what UMA's referencing. So in this case, for example, we will do a human female, human males, elf female, elf male, cat female, cat male, and then we just need to define the recipe itself, which is in turn these files. Now the only difference between the female and the male is the beginning will either have an F or an M. The rest of it stays the same. And that's important for this system to help you automate it. So all of the females we know will start with a F, gloves, gets another underscore, and then at the end of it we're adding the value of our T1, which is defined up here after we create our loop. We're taking our loop count, adding 1 to it, so first iteration, loop 0, will count for female gloves underscore number 1. And then we're basically going to do this for the others. All the females get the exact same gear. Now for the males, we basically just need to come in and change the F to an M. So now we have 3 references for the females, 3 references for the males for their gear. Now we just have to come through and actually create these into a prefab. Now, this is confusing. My first time doing this, I had no idea, because basically for the display template, you have to reference it in the model. But for the model, we have to save the model, but then once we save it, we have to get rid of it, which means that we don't have a reference to it no more. And we somehow need to reference it, otherwise we still got to go through and drag and drop each and every single reference, which defeats the purpose of automating. So we're going to use the prefab utility. This will save the prefab and then give a return to what it just created. So in our little system here, if we look at our prefabs, this one here is all set up. We've gone through and gave it the target slot, which we've set up to here. We've told it this goes on the hands. And then for each one of these slots here, we filled in the information that goes there. Now, when we look at the equipment display itself, it wants a reference to that file, but the file only exists inside the scene at the moment. It doesn't do anything. So we need to save it out of the scene into a prefab, take the object that it creates, and we need to put it in here. So this needs to basically get a reference to it for the model. So to do that, we are going to basically call the variable that we're setting, and we're going to make it equal to the response from the prefab utility. It sounds complicated, but it's not. And I make it sound more complicated than it is just because I suck at talking. But in this case, we need to set the component for the model inside of the display. So our display temp, that is the one that's inside the scene that we've already instantiated, not the prefab template. We want to get its component, and this is called the equipment display. And it's just the regular display here, Atavisms. And then we're going to reference it the exact same way. We need to come in here and set its model. And this is going to be equal to the fun code of the prefab. We need a prefab utility. We are going to save as prefab. We're going to pass it in our temporary model. That's the one that's instantiated into the scene. And we're going to tell it where we want to save it to, which is the file name we created above for the model file name. And there. So this is going to fire up the prefab utility, tell it to save that object, the model temp that's instantiated into the scene, as the file name we defined, and then we're going to return that result into the displays temp that's instantiated into the scene and tell it its model variable equals whatever we just saved this thing as, whatever the ID is that Unity created for it. That's it. Now all we need to do is save that prefab for the display, which is basically the exact same thing we just did. We're going to tell it we want a prefab utility save as a prefab asset. We're going to save our temporary display, so the display temp, and this is the display file name, and we're done. Now all we have to do is clean it up. We're going to destroy the objects we just created. So we're going to destroy the temporary model file. And we're also going to destroy the display model that we put into the scene. This is for memory management, especially if you have a lot, like we have 203 loops we're doing. We don't want to keep all these things running and just gobbling up our memory. So the destroy is basically going to make sure we don't have duplicates. As soon as we're done creating them, setting up the variables, and then saving them as their own prefab, we want them out of the system, delete them, destroy the object itself. Then we're going to recreate them with each and every single loop. That is important for this to be outside of the for loop, because this gets created and then we are going to keep that piece of memory. We're going to use that piece of memory in here, and then we're going to basically delete what's in the memory without removing the memory. We're not destroying the actual reference to the object. We're just getting it out of the scene so that all of the variables are reset back to the default, which is what's saved into the template versions that we made. This is literally the entire system. Complicated, isn't it? I mean, we fit this in like 50 lines of code. So if we save this, we go back into Unity, we should see a gargantuan ton of copies for our gloves. So we should see gloves 1 through 27. We should end up with 2 sets, one in the displays and one in the models. We don't need that in here, so get rid of you. Our stuff here is set up. Now you could do this from a menu function, but I don't see the point, considering you'll set this up to basically run for your system once you've created all your objects. You run it, and then you never need it again. You can delete it, and yeah, there's no point having it up on your hotbar for something you don't use often. So with this, all we gotta do is go into our scene view, game view, doesn't matter, run it, and then it's just going to do everything for us. You can see it's going to start going through, and in this case we are getting an error. Apparently I didn't, pre-dabs. Yeah, I can spell, can't I? Yeah, prefabs. How about a B instead of a D? That might work. Prefabs. Oh, wow, my spelling is just absolutely horrid. Gotta love it. Now, since I tried to run a loop, I didn't set up any safety checks here. I did try to make up a model, so we're just going to delete it. And then run it again. And boom, it's done. We look at our console, we got no errors. We got one saying, hey, we started up the... Wow, I couldn't even spell that right. Started the look. Wow. Apparently I have not had enough coffee today to spell for the life of me. This is a loop, not a look. And it started up the loop for the duplicates on the gloves. You'll set this up to do your thing. In my case, I'll add them in to do the chest pieces, legs, shoes, everything else in their own separate loops. But now, it's gone through and created our prefabs for us. Now this is the annoying part with Atavism, is you have to go through and create all these things by hand. Now in this case, they're not hard, they're just annoying, especially if you do things in order. You know, you make up all your outfits and then you try to add them in Atavism, and then you have hundreds of outfits and components to add in, and you got to make 2 files for each one and set them all up, or just run the script and it'll do it for you. So here I can look at my model. It's defined it to go to the hands. It's kept the 6 initial recipes, but it's gone through and populated. Human female gets the model F gloves 1. The human male gets the M gloves 1. Same for the L female, the L male, and so on and so forth. These are all now defined. Now if we look into our displays and we look at the same one, gloves 1, you'll see it's referencing gloves 1 model that we just created. Hey, these are done. We have now created the wardrobe display equipments for Atavism for as many objects as you want without adding them to the scene, duplicating the holy bejeebers out of them, saving them as their own individual prefabs, and then going through and assigning each and every single variable and then dragging and dropping them into the model. We've done it with a teeny tiny bit of code, nothing fancy. There's like 50 lines of code here minus the headers. So just a quick iteration, what we've done. I don't know why you added that. This new version of Visual Studio just keeps adding things in that I don't know what it's trying to do. But whatever, it is what it is. So we are referencing the Atavism system. This allows us direct access to call on things like the character clothing and the equipment display, because those are part of the Atavism system. When we start typing them in, it will just say, hey, that's part of the Atavism system, I know what you want. And then we can reference them direct that way. It just makes it easier to put them in there. It's not necessary. I'm coming here and adding like Atavism dot character clothing, but that just looks cleaner for me. We're using the editor because we are basically running the prefabs. The prefab utility is basically a Unity system, so it's part of the editor, I believe it is. So we add it in the editor, and those are the usings. We're of course using the Unity engine because it's Unity in general. We're using the editor for the prefabs, and Atavism for easier reference to its scripts. We're coming into our class. We're creating placeholders for our templates. And our templates are short, sweet, and easy. They are empty prefabs from the equipment display. We have a model template that is set up for all of our races, for all of the race variances, genders, and so on and so forth. Ready to take the target and have all of its stuff defined. Nothing is defined yet. We have the equipment display template that is basically an empty equipment display. It is set to the default for equipment for attaching an object. It is attaching armor, and the only thing it needs is the model data. We hop into our script. We start our start loop. When the program starts in the run mode, we're going to create two new game objects. One is going to be a temporary version of the model data, and one's going to be the temporary version of the display data. And those are just going to be instantiating copies of these game objects into the scene itself, changing their information, saving them as a prefab, deleting them, rinsing and repeating. Here we're going to set up our for loop. We're going to start at 0. We're going to run it 27 times. Each loop we add 1. T1 we're using because my numbering system doesn't start at 0. My first item starts at number 1, but computers start at number 0. So we're just taking our 0 from our X, adding a 1 to it, and then when we, for example, reach 26 will be the final loop, it will reference number 27. The string model name is what the model file name is going to be called. So if we look at where it's created, then we come into here. At the top it says it is gloves_1 model, and that is how we defined it inside of here. Gloves underscore gets the number from our T1, adds a model to the end of it. This is so we can differentiate what is the display prefabs versus the model prefabs. The models reference the model info. The display references which model file tells it what to do. We do the same thing with the display name, only without the model name at the end. In the model file name, we're going through and pointing it to the assets, prefabs, models folder, model name, and we're adding a prefab to the end of it. When these are done, you'll need to move all these files to your resources to make sure they are built with Unity. I strongly suggest you do not make a script that just auto dumps files into your resources. Make sure you're happy with them, everything works, before you put them in the resources. So in this case, I'm putting them in a temporary location for the prefab so I can check them, make sure everything works before I just blow up my resources and then have to try to clean it up without messing anything else up in there. So these are temporary locations. Change these after you're sure everything works. Wherever you put them goes into your resources, just like Atavism's put them. They've got all of theirs under the resources, content, equipment displays, and then they all get broke down in their categories. You'll want to do the same thing, just try not to do that with scripts. It's a pain in the butt if something goes wrong to try to clean it up without accidentally deleting something. Next, we're just creating copies of our prefab templates, which are the ones up here. We're telling them go ahead and give us some copies of those, put them into the scene, and we're going to use our temporary object that we created here. We're instantiating the templates into the scene itself. We're then setting up their names that will represent how they are seen in Unity. We're telling the character clothing from the model to set the target slot to wherever your models need to go. Here we are doing a character clothing for the recipe list for each one of, in our case, 6 loops for the 6 list entries for for these down here, the recipe list element 0 through 5, 6 entries. We're telling it each of the races, males and females, which files they get. We're just repeating that all the way through. The display temp is assigning its variable to the model, which is referencing the prefab we're about to create. And that model will equal whatever it is that we created with the prefab utility, saving the model that's temporarily in the scene. Whatever it creates, it will reference back the sort of UID of it, and that is what we're going to assign to the model data. And then we're going to go ahead and save the display, and then we're going to go ahead and destroy our temporary objects in the scene, and then it will start back at the beginning and do the loop all over again until it's reached the end, and then it will end. That's the entirety of the script. Nothing fancy, nothing special, but it will save you a gargantuan ton of time, especially if you have a lot of things in your scene like I do. We did have over 1,000 outfit components, but because of some of the changes, we lost a gargantuan ton of them, and right now we're down to like 203 per gender, versus I think we started off at like 500 of them, and most of them are now deleted. But even with our smaller 200 versions of them, that's 400 files we would have to create by hand, and with this you just create them on their own. Now later you still have to add these to the database, and we'll be showing how to do the database system on another aspect, and hopefully it probably won't be too long for that one because it is an important one to get in there. But we're going to be utilizing the results of the UMA's photo booth, creating all those little icons and everything else, and creating up the basically an automated version of putting all this stuff as well into the database for Atavism itself before we actually get into doing everything. This will not set up things like the actual variables for them, but it will assign like the icons, the names, and all that sort of stuff for what to do. And then as you add them into your stuff, all you got to do is add in the basic information without pointing and clicking to a whole bunch of equipment displays. Everything you can automate saves a lot of time, so hopefully it helps some people out. And give any comments on it for what you want us to do. I will also post a link to the paste bin that has a version of the code that is kind of commented out. And I'm going to pop that up here, maybe you can see it. This is the code that I popped up there. It is up on paste bin, and this is basically pretty much the exact same thing we just did. The only difference is I've added in a bunch of comments on what each step is doing, and can I just run from it. I will add a link to it in the YouTube, and if it was useful, give a like, give a subscribe, give a whatever, let us know. And if there's anything else you want us added into it later, give us a holler. Later, have a great one.